Welcome to the Jarrod Thomas Show Podcast. We're trying something new here at Leighton Media. We've got some podcasting that we're doing. If you want to inquire, you can certainly reach out to me or to a guy named Jacob Lindemann, or you can just simply call 701-775-4611, and we will get you all hooked up. Or you can go Jay Lindemann, Lindemann, at Leighton.media, and he can schedule a time for you as well. But this is the Jarrod Thomas Show Podcast, going to be done now on a more regular basis. And as you can see, things are a much more sophisticated than they've ever been before. And I thought, with this new launch or the relaunch or whatever you want to think about, I thought, who can I talk to? So I did what I normally would do back in the day when I was in the talk show world more frequently. I thought, well, let me look at the headlines. And everywhere I turned, I see tariffs. I see President Trump trying to reconfigure really what I think is to be a global economy of sorts, right from the good old United States of America. How have tariffs changed your life, though? Are you seeing more money in your pockets? What's going on? So I thought, well, who could I talk to? And I thought my old buddy, David Flynn, whom sadly I haven't talked to a lot. But Flynn's one of those guys that I could call him at 11 o'clock at night, and he'd come to my house. If I needed something, he'd be right there. So Flynn and I have been buddies for quite some time. And today I want to tap into his expertise a little bit and talk about tariffs. And Flynn, the very first question I have for you here is this morning, the United States of America has said to China, 104% tariffs. Other countries are responding in kind. What are your thoughts on this, and really, what's the end game here?
Okay, excellent question about the end game. I would tell you that a lot of people have no clue what the end game is, even those who are sort of in charge of policy right now. That would be my assessment of it. But so let's take this at its first level, which is there's an expectation that we've had some long-standing problems, imbalances / unfair treatment when it comes to international trade relations with other countries. Okay, that's something I think you could potentially point to and say, yeah, there are issues. What's the appropriate resolution to that? I think at one level, then you open up. Do we have tariffs? Do we have other kinds of diplomatic negotiations? I mean, there's lots of things you can do, and then let's just even say we've got to the point where tariffs are appropriate. How do you set them? Okay, what's the right level? And that's where I think we really sort of went off the rails. Whether you think there were other strategic options available or not. Even if you thought not, I think the tariff numbers as they came out were calculated wrong. We're off, and we're too high to achieve what you wanted without the infliction of incredible pain on trade partners. And so now you're looking at a circumstance where their knee-jerk response is going to be, we have to hit back. We can't let this happen. This is going to push an imbalance entirely in the other direction. Now, I will not sit here and tell you that, there are, that every country in the world was playing fair. I will not tell you that there were countries that we could have had a trade surplus with. What I will tell you is, as a wealthy country, it's a normal thing for us to have a trade deficit with another country. We are a wealthy country. We're going to buy from other places. We're going to say, well, it's just cheaper for us to get it there. Just like you would see a wealthy individual will go to the discount store. Well, because I can. That's how I get wealthy and stay wealthy. I find cheap options in other places. Right. So I think what the big question mark is right now is how to de-escalate. All right. I'm not even talking about stopping tariffs. I'm talking about de-escalation of this back and forth one-upmanship that we've seen going on, because that's gone beyond any kind of of even unfounded economic rationale. That this is now a back and forth, schoolyard bully brawl type of circumstance that you need to de-escalate and then discuss, because that's just not productive and that's not helpful. There's no rationale or fundamentals that say, okay, now we go to 104% tariffs on China. That's a, you responded to me and I didn't like the way you responded, and so I'm going to push back on you again. Again, largely unproductive and largely unhelpful, especially to some kind of long run resolution, as well as then any kind of economic fallout from that is just going to become that much more intense.
So at the end of it then, let's say that the president gets what he wants out of this, which is, if I understand it, just from a layman's point of view, is he wants things to be more equal. He said yesterday, I think, in a press conference at the White House, talking about coal and drill, baby, drill, and yesterday was this massive unveiling of that strategy. The president was given some time, which he often is, to stand in front of a podium, and he was basically just talking. And in that diatribe that I was watching yesterday, he talked about how the United States of America, with the new tariffs in tow, is putting $2 billion, with a B, $2 billion back into the coffers in the United States of America because of these new tariffs that he has put forward. So then I think, okay, well, there's $2 billion a day. Again, if you take him at his word, it's coming back into the coffers of the United States of America. But at what point do these countries that have seen these increased tariffs start looking for other trade partners, if for no other reason to say, you changed the deal, man, I don't want to do this anymore? So are we going to lose trade partners over this? And perhaps we already have.
I think your question is a really good one. And the key element there is the amount of time it takes, right? I mean, that's a trade partners and supply chains, because that's one of the reasons we have trade partners is to make sure we have appropriate supply chains and ideally efficient and least cost supply chains. Well, as you increase tariffs, you change the nature of those supply chains, both for domestic, that is U.S. producers, and for foreign producers. And so I think your comment there gets at a very key point, which is, how quickly does it take people to adjust? How quickly does it take Japan and China and Korea and Vietnam to sit there and say, we have to create some kind of Asia trade bloc, and we need to decide that we're going to be less dependent on the United States, either for our supply chain or for our end markets. And what do? Do they focus on Europe? Do they focus internally? You are entirely correct. The process by which this is being done, and quite honestly, the magnitude of the initial push into these tariffs is probably accelerating the decision of some of these people and partners into decisions about realignment and reallocation. And that's concerning to me, because if we're not selling final products overseas to some of these partners, I think that's a worry, because we're losing out on markets. Our producers are losing out on markets for their final goods. That's not good. Does it jeopardize our supply chains? If we look at it and say, okay, we're going to create more domestic production within those supply chains, that's potentially good. I would question some of the employment estimates that we've seen coming out of these, because, of course, there's a lot more automation available out there. And when you're talking about building a new factory, you're not talking about building a new factory as if it was even 20 years ago. You're talking about a whole new level of automation that goes into these kinds of factories, so far less employment than what you had before, and a different level of skill that comes with that employment. I'm probably more likely, if I build a factory now, to hire computer programmers and technicians and these kinds of people to help with the automation side, as I am to hire what we would traditionally call like line workers, people who are working on the production line. So I think that's a very big concern. I think one of the problems that we're going to encounter, I believe there's an assumption from the White House that this is going to work. Okay, I believe that there is no plan B for what if this doesn't go right, or what if people just pivot away from trading with us and trade with each other, or turn internally at Europe, or create new supply chains involving other countries other than us. That's a real concern, and I don't believe that there's a real plan B idea in place. This is the only plan we got, and we expect that this is going to work, and that is probably a bigger problem at some level than the fact that you went forward with tariffs with a faulty calculation that were too high. You've got no way to get out of that and unwind that because you haven't planned for it.
This president, like any other president that I've seen in my 51 years of life, seems to shoot, aim, fire. Happened very quickly. He would argue that maybe we do things under the guise of, well, it should have been done before. It's done under the guise of, we never should have got into these agreements in the first place. It's done under the guise of, we're the United States, baby. Screw all. There seems to be a general lack of understanding as to how all this works. He seems to be more interested in bullying his way to his favorite outcome than he is really taking care of the citizens of the United States of America. Some have said this is nothing more than a sophisticated tax on the lower and the middle class. Would you agree with that?
Certainly, I think there's a bullying aspect to this. I want my way. I do think when he said, I believe it was late last week, he said something to the effect of, sometimes you have to accept some pain, to get some of these changes. I think actually that's a very correct and accurate statement, and I think you can point to 20 or so years in the United States where Congress, the White House, people in general were not willing to accept any pain. That there were constant interventions to make sure that there were not adjustments that had to be made by American consumers, American workers, the American corporate structure, even government. So I think there's that's true. I think when you look at it, if you want to, we can think of it technically, but you could also just think of it sort of intuitively. When prices adjust, everybody's got to start making adjustments. And what are tariffs going to do? They're going to make the prices we see in the store adjust. So even products made in the USA will see price increases, because if I had to keep my price down to compete with China, and now the Chinese made product is going to cost 2 times as much, well, I can raise my price a little bit, make some more profit for me and my shareholders or my family, depending on what kind of company it is. And so, I'll be happy, and people will still buy it because it's lower cost than what the Chinese equivalent is. So we expect all these prices to rise, even for domestically sourced products. So everybody's now going to go through this readjustment process. And so, the Flynn household, the products we buy, are we buying hamburger? Are we buying chicken? Are we buying steak? You're going to start to see these kinds of adjustments made constantly, and you're going to look for savings opportunities. Do I buy in bulk when things are on sale? Do I buy more of this because it's a product that's gonna last? It's a non-perishable item. So I think that's what's going to happen. But who has the least flexibility, to get to your point? who has the least flexibility with their budget? It's usually the lower income groups. All right, they don't have options necessarily to go to multiple stores. They don't have options necessarily to sit there and choose between a name brand product or a non-name brand product. And as you look at those things, with all prices going up, they're generally speaking going to be forced to buy less, just flat out. That's all their option is going to be, is to buy less. And so, and if they don't, have savings that were going on, and we as a country save far too little, just generally. But if they don't have savings, living paycheck to paycheck, that's when you have to start making sacrifices and say, what do I do? And that's problematic, because it's things like, do I go to the dentist? Do I go to the doctor? Do we eat? Do we eat less? Do we skip meals? Do the kids have the right clothes, or do the kids get a computer so that they can do their homework? I mean, you start thinking about the things that are, whether or not you would call them a necessity, if that there are things that are necessities now that when you and I were in school, we're the same age. When you and I were in school, there were luxury items like a computer in your household. Mm-hmm. I don't view that as a luxury item anymore. I mean, if you don't have a computer in your household, your kid even in elementary school is missing out on learning opportunities and things that others are getting. So yes, I mean, is it designed that way? I wouldn't go so far as to say we're designing these tariffs and this tariff regime to punish the lower income groups, but it's a fact that they're the ones that, generally speaking, bear a significant brunt of this.
So Flynn, as we think this through, then, I mean, one of the things that came to mind when I was listening to you talk there is, at the end of the day, this is really what's coming to a head here is this culmination of kind of back to what we were taught in school, which was, hey, save 30% of your paycheck. That just goes away. You don't even know it's there. Learn to live in that 70%. In fact, later in life, I mean, this hasn't always been the case for people our age, you could set it up so that 30% just immediately was swept into a savings account. That's still the case for most of us. I mean, we're going to get to savings account and the market here shortly. But the question that I have for you right this second is, because, and you touched on it, Americans aren't real great at saving, perhaps historically low savers. I read the other day 7 out of 10 Americans live outside of their means, 70%. So as you're walking through your workplace today, take a look at 10 people and just know that 7 of them are living outside of their means. And then something like this comes along. Part of it makes the president's point, doesn't it?
I think there's a degree of it, and again, I think the question becomes, what's the right way to affect these outcomes, right? I mean, that's part of it, and do you need a shock and awe situation like this? Do you need to do this in this particular fashion? Again, I think that's where the debate can be. I think the initial responses, where you saw markets around the world go down. I think we'll see some turnarounds in some of these markets. Realistically, what you should expect is a lot of volatility. Okay, now translate global economic volatility down to the typical American consumer. Yeah, the typical American consumer lives outside of what their paycheck is. Okay, however, it's not usually as bad as if you look at one particular month, because their income tends to go up over time. You do have a sort of natural progression. You have to be careful, I guess I'll say it, which sort of age group you're looking at when you talk about living beyond your means. When you're at 20-something, you start to live beyond your means because you have to set up a household. And so you buy some things, and you're going to finance these things on the back of your future earnings and what have you. Same thing as you start off a young family. You're going to be buying some things that are beyond your means, and you're going to have to finance them. But I think, again, what we're dealing with right now, I think, unfortunately, is an effort to to reassert a vision of the American economy that I'm not sure, first off, was ever really as grand as people want to make it out to be, okay? But secondly, I don't think we can get back to it because it's a very different world. Do we want to make America the 1950s, 1960s manufacturing, type of titan that it was? Because there were real reasons that non-economic reasons that we were. Europe was destroyed. There was a world war, and we didn't fight it here. We fought it other places. Those places needed to be rebuilt. They didn't have factories. We had factories. We could build, and we sold, And we had the Marshall Plan. We're going to help you rebuild, but you're buying from us. So that was sort of a natural market that we created for ourselves, and as they're rebuilt, they suddenly don't need us as much. They can do that, And again, the 1950s and 60s had some stellar economic indicators, but at the same time, it's not the era where nobody had problems, right? I mean, there were still problems, there were still issues, and it was a matter of we also have to talk about what's the right set of things that people have to do. Like do we think that someone with a high school education should be able to support their family? Depending on the size. Say a spouse and two children on one income. Should it be the case on one income? Should both of those kids be able to go to college? Should you be able to go on a Hawaiian vacation every year? I mean, these are the kinds of things that I think are going into some of this mindset when people say things are more expensive, we can't afford this. People should be able to afford this. Okay, should, but how do we get there? And I don't think that the tariffs are a way that you're going to sit there and think we've created this broad-based situation. And I go back to the robotics, the autonomous systems in manufacturing anymore. We're not talking about 150 line workers in a factory the way we might have used to.
You see that a lot with this president who. It sometimes feels like he's caught between what happened in 1950 and what happens today with the promise that we're going to bring it back to 1950. We're going to build steel mills here. Well, to your point, that's going to look much different in 2025, 6, 7, and beyond than it did in the 1950s. And will it have the same impact on the economy? And is that really the goal here with these tariffs, is to get some of these companies that have been building overseas because it's been cheaper and whatever, the labor's cheaper, the product's cheaper, all of it's cheaper, but now you want to bring them home, and the way you're going to do that is by making it almost intolerable for them to do it on the other side of the ocean. It's a strange tactic. It's one, to me, that it gets really hard to connect the dots of any long-term success that may come from this strategy. Bringing it home, Flynn, to North Dakota. North Dakota, it's been said, doesn't see the economic highs as much, doesn't see the economic lows as much, generally just sits here with little blurps on the radar, just kind of up a little, down a little, up a little. A rich state, a wealthy state in terms of we're not going to drag this into a legacy fund conversation. I promise you we won't do that, at least not this time. But
not this time.
Not this. Yeah.
You got to get people back used to me, okay? You got to get people. I'm ready to go. That for anybody who's watching who's never seen, that's like a triggering word phrase for me. Okay, he knows that was like 10 years of me griping on the radio about things. So yeah, that's. Let's give them an episode before we go.
The largest saving account in the history of savings account is the legacy fund. And again, we're getting dangerously close to dragging Flynn back into that, so I want to stop there. But if you're worried about tariffs and you live in North Dakota, how does this, or how could this directly affect you and business in our state?
Okay, so from a consumer perspective, when you're looking at the tariff situation, you're going to start thinking about, go to the grocery store, and when you go to the grocery store, especially in the produce aisle, look around the produce section, and see where they say the country of origin is. Okay, so like I went to the grocery store the other day, I bought some bell peppers. Country of origin was Mexico. Okay, well, now, we know that's from overseas. Bananas, overseas. Some of the other produce I bought, overseas. All right. So as you look at these and say, well, they're from overseas, then suddenly you're going to have to start thinking that, well, Target's going to start raising the price on these in order to make sure they account for the increased cost they experienced of bringing these into the country, right? I mean, this is what's going to happen. Same thing with Walmart, same thing with with a Hugo's or whoever it might be. You're just going to see this happen. Now, the biggest problem is that these tariffs are variable across these different countries, and so suddenly it might be cheap. The biggest problem is the variability. But also what we see with the China situation and the president right now, the fact that he might just decide he's upset with a response and he might increase, and so suddenly you're going to get constant changes in these. The businesses are going to have a very difficult time. You know what an easy strategy for a business to do is? To sit there and look at, well, I bring in from all these different countries, and the highest tariff right now is this, so I'm just going to raise all my prices as if I was getting them from the highest tariff country. And so suddenly all your produce prices go up. All right. Now it's the same thing for all kinds of products that you're looking at. And so you're going to have to look and see. And even if the product is from a company that is from the United States, if they're using inputs from overseas, if the particular fertilizer they're using, if there's a particular piece of equipment or other thing that they use that requires stuff from overseas, their costs are going up, so the prices are going to go up. So your consumers are going to see that. Your businesses in North Dakota right now are getting concerned about their supply chains, right? I mean, they're sitting there saying, well, where do my inputs come from? The farmers, where do they get their fertilizers from? Where do they get parts for ag equipment from? Do they come from from, I would say, Canada, overseas? But one of the wonderful things about international trade is everything is overseas, even if it's technically overland. But do you get those kinds of parts from Canada? And especially think about North Dakota. Would that just be the closest location? Would it be closer to be dealing with a supplier in Winnipeg versus a supplier in, I don't know, Louisiana? Okay, I mean, you've got those travel considerations, you've got the time that equipment is down considerations, and so as you think about those things, now you have tariff costs in there as well, and if parts are going to cost me more, then suddenly we're gonna see these kinds of issues, and so I'm not sure where they're looking right now, because we have a lot of different businesses, all right, and we have a lot of those different concerns. But here's the added element: whatever I'm producing, where is it going? Mm-hmm. And so if I'm shipping something, and even if I'm shipping it to China, I mean, look at a map. It might be easiest for us to ship it through Canada. But now am I going to pay tariffs because I'm shipping a good from the U.S. into Canada? And I mean, and then I got to get to a point. I mean, the disruptions that are occurring and the adjustments that have to be made are not trivial for all sizes of producers, small businesses to large businesses, and you're going to be faced with a lot of difficulty and adjustment. And again, I think China's a special case right now. I don't think the president necessarily will have this sort of tit for tat game going on with every country, certainly, but with China he seems to have that. But if it starts to unfold that way with other countries, and let's just pick on a European country. So let's just say France just decides, well, if you're going to do this, we have to do the same in response as part of the European Union and what have you. Well, okay, fine, but suddenly that happens, and what do we see is the response here? Well, we're going to slap even more tariffs on. The back and forth that can occur and cause constant adjustment and constant issues. Right now, Canada imposed a tax on spirits. a tariff on spirits from the U.S. So Kentucky, and, as a state that produces a lot of different spirits, is sitting there going, oh man, and this market was growing for us, and now it's going to cost more, and now we're going to have this particular issue. I think again, it's that adjustment and constant adjustment that consumers and others are going to have to go through. That's going to be incredibly fatiguing. It's going to be a constant comeback. Couldn't get this product this week, either because it's off the shelves or because we just decided it was too darn expensive. That kind of thing. And by the way, there will be winners. I mean, there'll be domestic producers that have an opportunity, and that price wedge that the tariff imposes will give them an opportunity to move in. But it, generally speaking, is still going to be a higher price to us, the end consumer. So I think it's again, I'm prepared for a long-term fatiguing set of trips when I'm buying things, and for what gain? Because it's gonna take time. Nobody can instantly increase production, to fill these kinds of gaps, or build factories to do this kind of thing. And here's the next question, JT. This president is done in 4 years. Do we think this continues with another president? Do we think this continues? Do we even think this continues with this president? Because if I'm going to invest capital in building a factory, that is a minimum 3 to 5 year time frame to get the capital, to get the workers, to get all this stuff going forward. And now, can I get, what's my cost of steel, JT? What's my cost of cement? All these things are now in play because of the tariffs. So at the same time that you're giving me this encouragement to source production domestically, if the facilities don't exist, I have to build them, and at higher cost than what I was before, in all likelihood. And so now, but do I think that investment will pay off in the long run? Does this trade tariff regime go away with a new president, whether they're Republican or Democrat? I mean, that's a calculation a lot of people are going to have to make.
So the other thing, generally speaking, of course there'll be exceptions to every rule, but generally when things get up in price, they don't come back down, right? So these tariffs sort of raise the prices of producer goods, and then the tariffs go away, but does that necessarily mean that the prices come back down?
No, because you've gotten used to paying it. So if the tariff goes away, you got used to paying it, you're expecting that, and that's what we call inflation expectations. All right, and that's one of the things that entities like the Federal Reserve are very concerned with all the time. Yes, the actual price level is of importance to them, but it's really, where do you think prices are going over the next year, over the next 3 years? And if that becomes something where you expect these to get quite high, they worry about that. They want sort of low, stable inflation expectations. That's their goal, is that the average inflation is expected to be around 2% a year. An increase in price, but smaller, not enormous, and they want it to be stable. But right now, we're talking above that and volatile, and so are they going to raise interest rates? Are they going to try to take policy actions to cut that back? And then what do those interest rates do to everything else that we're dealing with? There's so much volatility in the economic system right now on a policy side that we're going to have a lot of difficulty, figuring this out. And so it's, I'll say it in this way. For me, it's something of a full employment plan for me. I mean, I'm not going to run out of things to talk about, it seems like, anytime soon. Not that I'm sitting here going, yeah, I like that kind of, discussion, but it's something that we're going to have to think about, because right now, I suggest people think of it this way. 1995, late 90s, we start getting this free trade movement. We get NAFTA, we get all these other things, okay? There's a real push for open trade, free trade, which pushes this multinational business model. I get different components and parts from all over the world at cheaper levels than I can domestically, and so you do get certain industries going away. This was a rise of shareholder interests above, say, employment interests. Okay, so the shareholder interests went up, okay, and became the sort of predominant interest, and so you got lots of trade liberalization. Now, yes, there were job losses and industry losses and all kinds of things that we would see and have to deal with. Hopefully there was retraining. Hopefully there were other things, right? One of the things that does come out as a generic benefit, though, is that, generally speaking, with this multinational movement, you also had lower prices. Because everything was cheaper in the supply chain, you got lower prices. And now what we're seeing is a pushback against that. And is it a overdue pushback? I probably think so at some level. Do I think shareholder interests were put above worker interests too much? I think you can make that argument. Do I think it is the case that there could have been more balanced approaches to these kinds of movements? Sure, always can be. Do I think this is going to solve that particular problem? This tariff regime and this approach is going to solve that particular problem? No, it's like a genie. Once you let it out of the bottle, you're kind of done, right? And so that's something else that we're going to have to think about, consider, and deal with.
Flynn, what, if anything, 401ks look a lot different today than they did a month ago. The stock market, and again, we always like to, you're not a financial advisor, you're not,
right.
The question is more about the mechanics. This morning, I was listening to Gordon Deal, and he had somebody on from some Wall Street Journal story that was written, blah, blah, blah. And she was saying that if you're not really all that close to retirement, just hang in there. It's likely the stock market and your 401k has a long history of coming back. If you're retired, there's probably a little bit more to worry about, but still, if you've got $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 kicking around in a 401k plan, did you lose some money? Sure. But the longer this goes on, what does it mean to the stability? Let's start with the 401ks that most people are familiar with and have one or know somebody that does or whatever. What happens to those retirement accounts when something like this happens? And again, not a financial advisor, but what choice do you have but to hang on for dear life?
Right. So, that hang on strategy, that hang on, quite honestly, we've entered that era now, right? The time for gambling on these changes was was a while ago, right? You markets are pricing in these risks, and again, the volatility is going to be such that I wouldn't want to be a stock picker right now, because trying to pick an industry, based on the president's policies right now, very difficult to do, very difficult to see, especially when he says things like, I'm open to negotiation. Well, does that mean that, suddenly everything's less from this country? And we're going to have problems with that, okay? So, but given that, I think the bigger concern and what people need to watch and what people need to talk to their congressperson about and talk to a senator about is, the longer this goes on, the more entrenched those higher prices become. Just like you mentioned before, the more entrenched those higher prices become, if my investment portfolio is not growing the same or is subject to volatility, growing some days, down some others, if that's going on that way, then whatever retirement I had planned is potentially in jeopardy as the prices go up and my retirement package doesn't go up by an equivalent amount. And that's really sort of what I think people want to generically watch. Not the level of where you're at any particular moment. Like day to day, it'll get depressing in a very, very short time. What you need to be considering and what you need to be thinking is, what kind of retirement was I even looking for? I have no idea sort of how people plan their retirement. I know how we thought about it, like where are we going to be, what do we want to do, those kinds of considerations, and what kind of money do you need? But like you, I am 51, not feeling like I'm imminently retiring, and so the plans are not something that I would even say is, truly worthy of like a preliminary designation, right? It's more of a, we've thought about a few things type of designation. And so, I can adjust more flexibly. But if I'm 60, much closer to retirement age, much closer to that imminent decision, yeah, you're going to want to pay attention, just like I should pay attention even at 50, to general price level movements, what's going on with those kinds of things, and what does that mean about the retirement I can afford, and do I have to adjust my savings now, or even at age 60, you can start to make some of those adjustments, and my investments for retirement, what plans I have for retirement, those kinds of things. What other assets do I look to have? So it's again more adjustment. But what I would be more concerned with is again, like, where do those price levels go? We were in a situation of declining prices. This is not going to allow prices to decline. Okay, will they spike up? I think it remains to be seen, but they're certainly gonna have less ability to come down as supply chains are, at least in the short run, relatively fixed. And you're going to be stuck with whatever, paying whatever it is. We as consumers are going to pay the bulk of those increases. So, what is that really doing, and where do we think price levels are going in the future? And then, for those who have annual wage contracts, when you renegotiate, what kind of leverage do you have to renegotiate higher wages next year to account for higher prices? Or Social Security payments automatically adjusting for the consumer price index? Are those going to be, are those expected to be higher? I mean, those are again all kinds of situations and circumstances we've got to deal with. And like you say, age profile, I would say this, absolutely, everybody should discuss with their financial advisor what's going on. The next time you meet them, what are the implications of what's going on now for my asset allocation, for the long run outlook to what I'm doing? Do I have to, you mentioned that 30% rule, do I have to try to up it for a while? Even in an era of higher prices, do I have to find some other sacrifices and say, or do I have to just sort of sit there and say, it's 30% of a smaller pie now, and I need to figure out how to, cut down so I can give 40% of the smaller pie to have the same amount of money going into the savings, those kinds of things.
Well, and then again, if you're 50 or 51 like we are, and you're thinking about this, and your max, let's say you're putting the max in that you can into your 401k, do you dial that back a little bit as you just watch it each day get chipped away at, and then eventually it's on life support, and then you got to work some more to make sure that it gets put back, and then most people, again, neither one of us financial advisors, diversify your portfolio, put it in places where it's tariff proof, if there is such a place. Do all that kind of stuff, right? Talk to your financial advisor. Again, neither one of us financial advisors. However, these things, the market then, and the interesting point again made this morning was, people forget the market is often thought of, not always, but often thought of as that's where rich people play. That's where wealthy people go to invest their money. When in fact, there's many Americans that aren't wealthy by whatever standard you consider to be wealthy that do play in the stock market, and they too are affected by this. And the stock market is maybe something more, because that's got a global impact to it, right?
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, one of the things that I think has been a policy misstep over the years, we had incredibly low interest rates. You and I, when we were younger, your parents could have a savings account that actually accumulated savings. You go to what would have been sort of our, early 30s into the 40s. If you had money in a savings account, it was basically just a placeholder for what you would normally do in a checking account, trying to make sure that little inflation didn't erode it. I mean, the era of the 1% savings account and these kinds of things. That's a very big problem for a lot of people. Pushed a lot of people into the stock market. Okay, well, now, and I'm not saying that the stock market's a horrible place to be, but I think there were a lot of people who would have normally been reluctant to get in the stock market that had no alternative but to get into the stock market if you didn't want the value of your earnings to go down. Okay, you just had to. So, with that in mind, I mean, you see now. I see advertisements in Grand Forks here for, here's a 4.7% CD, here's a 5.6% CD, and all these other things. I mean, the return of inflation did return, interest to levels where, okay, people living paycheck to paycheck could open up a checking account and a savings account and maybe start to see some of that accumulate. All right. Now, more than 50% of American households are in the stock market, absolutely, and that is a more global economic responder than your local bank account. And so you've got to be a little more wary of events like that. You've got to be a little more, cautious, I think, and understand, the kinds of things that you're getting invested in, and understand the kind of things that your advisor is putting you into. That is like the biggest piece of advice anybody should ever be given. If you don't understand, if they can't explain to you in terms you understand what they're putting you into, there's two things here. One, they perhaps don't understand what they're putting you in, and that's a problem. Okay? The second is they don't understand you and what you need to understand about it. That's not somebody who I would think could advise you. Okay, right. I would be wary of that. I've liked the advisors I've had, but I've scrutinized them. What's their background? In many situations, I want someone with a similar background to me because they have some similar understandings. We have some similar past history, so we're going to think about things roughly the same way. I wouldn't sit there and say that you shun somebody with different backgrounds, but if they can't talk to you in terms you understand, you really shouldn't be with them. So
yeah, it's and if I asked you to surmise this, it's a lot of hurry up and wait. Even at this point, we're still a little bit young in this game, and whether you're Republican or Democrat or moderate or anywhere in between, it's happening. Elections have consequences. It's happening. So if you could surmise it and kind of put a bow on it a little bit for me, Flynn, you might say it's a really good idea just kind of just hang tight for a while, or is there moves that you would suggest?
What I'm personally doing right now is hanging tight, because this is too early, too variable to completely understand what direction we're going. I'm fairly certain I'm not going to like the ultimate direction, but constant readjustments at this point aren't going to help me, and could do damage if the president decides to strike deals with other countries. Then suddenly you're going to see changes and adjustments and such. And I mean, look, honestly, I don't think the president cares about the economy at some level. I think he wants to make deals. I mean, he wrote a book, The Art of the Deal. He wants to be seen making deals. And ultimately, if these deals reach the objectives that he set out in some of these press conferences, or with that horrible billboard or the poster board, the fourth grade diorama press conference, I was waiting for Vanna White to walk out and start moving them. Like, do you remember Password, the
Yes.
old version of Password or Family Feud, when there actually was something that physically slid out of the way to show the answer? I mean, I was sitting there like, is Richard Dawson going to come out of the grave and start telling us, start kissing the women in the audience the way he did? I mean, I was just like, whoa, this, they don't have like a digital thing ready to go with this. That was a bit of a surprise. So I was like, we could have at least made it like Jeopardy with a TV, and Australia will pay, click. I'll take Australia for 40% tariffs. All right. So I mean, that whole thing aside, he wants to make deals. That's his mindset. That's who he is. So will those deals meet his initially stated goals? I have no idea. I don't think that's a requirement for him as long as he gets to make a deal, and that's what he wants to do.
All right, Dr. David Flynn is an economist at the University of North Dakota, and he's kind enough to join us on the Jarrod Thomas Show podcast. And Flynn, before I let you get out of here, real quick, every year you had run some models to find out how our favorite baseball teams are going to do. You happen to be from the Chicago area, so you are a Cubs guy, poorly misguided youth. I am a Yankee guy, again, I get brought up the right way. So what did those models tell you for this year? Dodgers are going to win 140 games and everybody else be damned?
That makes me laugh. That's a good one. No, I was looking at those, knowing you were going to ask me this, and I have a question that I'll put out to you that's more of a lingering question that we'll have to come back to and discuss. So essentially, it looks to me like the strongest divisions in baseball this year are going to be the AL East. That doesn't mean the best records come out of there, okay? Because of course, if you have a strong division, you play more division opponents, you could have a lower record. But you're in a weak division and you're only good team, you beat up on them. So I think the AL East stands out as one of the strongest in the American League for sure. And I looked at it, and I think the NL West is going to end up being this again. And so right now, I'm still processing some early returns, but I did have the Dodgers winning the NL West and the most likely one to come out of the National League. In the American League, it was a lot closer. Okay, it was a lot closer. But what I saw was it was going to be a Yankees outcome again, most likely outcome. I'm still a little confused at what's going on in the AL Central. And here's the big reason. They have an absolutely horrible team there, okay? Mm-hmm. It's called the Chicago White Sox, like historically bad team, all right? Like I watched one game and I'm like, oh my God, they're just ridiculously bad. I can't, finding creative ways to just lose games. I mean, it was impressive. When you have a team that bad, the record of your division opponents is sort of artificially inflated, and so
sure.
what that means is, and then that gets into matchups. And let's just say right now, I think it's the Tigers that are leading the AL Central. So let's just say, hey, the Tigers might have an inflated record, but do they happen to sort of style of play match up well with the Yankees? And so that's what we're still looking at simulations about. Is like, okay, is there just a team that no matter how bad their record is, they could be incredibly competitive against the Yankees? And as a result of that, if they get that playoff matchup, it's going to be something. And those kind of matchups matter obviously more in football, in basketball, in hockey. Those sports, the matchup, the style of play matchup matters more. But it does matter in baseball too. If you play a style of play that just means the Yankees won't play as well against them, then you got a better chance than, say, I don't know, the Red Sox, that kind of thing. So here's my question for you. I had this debate the other day. We're kind of out of the era of the 3,000 hit batter, the 500 home runs. There are a few players that I think have an outside shot at this, and certainly I think the 300 wins pitcher. All right, style of play has sort of prevented that. What are the new sort of surefire standards for the Hall of Fame? Right, 300 wins, 3,000 hits, 500 home runs. These were all sort of gimmies. That was just you're gonna be in the Hall of Fame. First ballot, maybe not, but you're gonna be in the Hall of Fame when you've hit those standards. What's the new one? I don't know that there's a great answer right away. I mean, this is one we can sort of constantly debate.
Well, so the way that I'll answer that, I think, is this way. So it wasn't lost on me that Alex Ovechkin broke Wayne Gretzky's record, right?
Mm-hmm.
And hockey is a completely different sport. Well, what in the actual...
Where's your chair made? Bad time to replace office furniture, JT. Bad time.
You know, to get to baseball directly, though.
Yeah.
And people aren't going to like this, maybe not going to like this take per se, but if I cared about that, I wouldn't do a podcast. I didn't think Joe Mauer was a Hall of Famer. I didn't think Burt Blyleven was a Hall of Famer.
No.
They happen to be twins. Okay, so stop with the twins hate.
Yeah.
Those of you that might be watching or listening to this. The reasons are as follows. I don't think Joe Mauer was on the field enough. There was a day to Flynn where first basemen were expected to hit 40 home runs a year.
Absolutely.
We seem to have drifted away from that. Catchers could hit 229, hit 8 home runs, but as long as they did the thing defensively and called a good game, long major league career awaits. So Marcus Stroman is a New York Yankee baseball player, and he's in his 10th or 11th year. And he came into camp, and there was talk of putting him in the bullpen, and then Garrett Cole blew out his elbow, and a bunch of things happened. So anyway, he ends up back up at the starting rotation, and he said all along, I'm a starting pitcher. And I thought, man, this guy, $18 million a year. And I thought, how many career wins does this guy have even? At the point that I looked, he was 87 and 85.
Yep.
Over 10 years. Now, I'm no mathematician, but that's about 8, almost 9 wins a year. And that garners you $18 million. I think that going forward, the Hall of Fame is going to turn into the Hall of Really Good. And I think we're going to see a lot of fringe people get in that years ago. And a lot of this is the old get off your lawn stuff, right? I mean, guys like us think Jordan is the best because we grew up with Jordan, and Jordan was awesome, and nobody compares to Jordan, and he was a winner. He played with the flu. He just 82 games. 40-year-old season, he played 80 games and only missed 2 because of a bad ankle and blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, LeBron's out there scoring 50,000 points and playing 22 years and is in the MVP conversation when he's 40 years old. And guys like us want to say, well, he's not as good as Jordan.
Yeah.
Okay, so then how do you compare? I think, Flynn, it's going to get to the point to where if you got 150 or 200 wins, how did you get them? In this day of specialization, right?
Yeah.
Most guys can't get past 100 pitches. Most guys, like the pitcher from Philadelphia, Paul Skynes.
Yeah.
The new latest and greatest. He just can't wait for his deal to run out so he can get out of Pittsburgh guy. I believe pitched yesterday. Just phenomenal pitcher. Kid's got the whole career ahead of him. He's got this new funky warm-up routine that's supposed to protect his arm and all the things. Basically, not impossible to hit, but darn close, right? He's the closest thing we've seen since Nolan Ryan or any of your great favorite pitchers you've ever seen. Already they're saying he's on a Hall of Fame track. What? Is Garrett Cole a Hall of Famer?
Yeah.
Is John Lester a Hall of Famer?
Oh, I say absolutely not. No. Now, the person arguing with me was my son, and he was telling me, look, he's got 3 World Series rings, he's got this. I am fundamentally objecting to putting a pitcher in the Hall of Fame who couldn't throw to first base. I'm just, it's like a requirement, I just was like, no, this is not. I don't remember the number for sure. I think he has like 211 wins. So to your point, is 200 that new threshold? And I sat there and I argued last night. No, you're telling me it might be, because I was saying 250. But there's nobody who's going to get to 250 either when you look at how things are going right now and where active players are.
So say Paul Skynes, we'll just keep using him as the example.
Sure.
Let's just say he finishes career at 205 wins, less than 100 losses,
okay,
right around 3 ERA. Let's just say, for the sake of this discussion, strikes out more players than innings pitched.
Okay.
Walks very few. And let's just say he leaves the Pirates and he goes to the Diamondbacks and he screws around and he wins a World Series. Hall of Famer? Plays 10 years, 12 years, whatever, gets bored with it, ends up being a social media influencer with his now wife, Livy Dunn, makes $300 million over the course of his career, and just doesn't get in any trouble. Is he a Hall of Famer?
I want to say no. Okay,
So
I want to say no. But from what you're telling me, that and I believe you. You pay more attention, I think, to baseball overall than I do. I mean, God, yeah. I mean, okay. I guess.
Yeah, great guy.
That's standard.
Well, but then at some point too, and this is just a complaint of mine that's a little bit off topic of what you're talking about. At what point do we put Bonds and Clemens, and what point do we put these guys in?
Sure.
But that's not your question. But where I think this really gets messy is with the batters and the hitters. Aaron Judge is probably the one, and Shohei Ohtani,
Right.
assuming he stays healthy, are the two guys that you look at today and go, unequivocally, are going to be first ballot Hall of Famers, likely unanimous Hall of Famers.
No, you're right about that.
Judge is year 9, I believe, maybe year 10. Shohei is still, we're just getting going. But Juan Soto, does he get in? Some of these guys that, elevate and celebrate type guys, I've heard people make an argument that Giancarlo Stanton should get into the Hall of Fame. No way. He's not on the field enough.
Well, and I think your point there is actually pretty well taken in terms of batters are more difficult to actually evaluate than pitchers. Why? Well, we're going to know. Whatever the stats may say, if this Paul Skynes guy was unhittable in his career or just dominant in his career, whether the numbers truly show that or not, you'll end up saying, no, I know that guy was good. I mean, if he's the kind of guy who lost 70 games in his career by 1 run, but he was keeping them in, and his career ERA is right around 3. He probably played on a lot of bad teams, and he kept his teams in it until Maddox left the Cubs and went to the Braves. Right, that was the kind of arc he was going to be on. He was going to have a horrible career win-loss percentage because the Cubs didn't consistently have a team around him, and he was the only thing keeping them in some of the games that were there. So I get it, right? And I think you're right. Dominance from a pitcher is a lot easier to sort of notice and see than dominance from a hitter, especially with the way they do some of the splits. They're doing resting of players now. And some of it's probably good. I mean, guys were playing through injury sometimes is, self-destructive. Okay, yeah, shut it down, take a rest. But it's especially every year. I think every year now I hear about the juice ball at the beginning of the year, right?
Yeah.
And so it's going to be
But you let Paul Skynes in. How do you keep Andy Pettit out? Right. You put Paul Skynes in. How do you keep John Lester out? I mean, trouble throwing to first base aside. How do you do that? How do you put Paul Skynes in, keep Kerry Wood out?
Yep. No, I get it. No, I absolutely understand it. And yeah, I mean, some of these I think are actually, look, this is actually good for, I love baseball. I know you love baseball. I think some of these discussions are actually good for the sport, right? I mean, it keeps you interested. And every generation has their best players, and those best players get into the Hall of Fame or don't get into the Hall of Fame. I happen to agree with you about Burt Blyleven. I mean, the Hall are really good.
Yep.
The Hall are really good. But, I'm going to ask it this way. Was he ever the number one on any of the teams he was on?
No. And the thing about Blyleven that drives me particularly crazy is that I think you get 10 years where the sports writers and everybody else, and he doesn't get in, doesn't get in.
The voting scheme that they use has to change as well.
That's exactly right. If you're going to do this and you're going to want people to believe that the Hall of Fame is really about the Hall of Fame, Deion Sanders talked about in football, there should be a second floor in the Hall of Fame. So it's the Hall of Famers of the Hall of Fame. So if you want to put some of these guys in that, Champ Bailey and some of these others that you're like, I watched Champ Bailey play. And Deion's point is, well, if you're going to do that, okay, but man, you've diminished what I did, and you've diminished what other Joe Montanas and the Tom Bradys and all these guys, you've diminished what we've done. Give us our own floor for the best of the absolute best. Yeah. That would be fascinating. But no, in this era where everybody gets a trophy and, everybody has to, one goes on the Hall of Fame, one gets an award, we all get an award type stuff. You're right. It's going to water down. The game has changed, and some would say, well, that's okay. I thought I'd hate the pitch clock. Turns out I love it. Speeds the game up, makes it go a little bit faster. But do we need bigger bases? I don't know. Can we only throw to first base twice? Next year we'll be able to tap our head and challenge, balls and strikes. I mean, there's going to be a point where if you start losing guys like me, that's going to be bad.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think so. On the balls and strikes, I think there's actually like simple solutions to some of these things. Okay, baseball actually has to police their umpires. I mean, anybody who saw Joe West or Angel Hernandez ump a game knew that these guys had the players they liked, the teams they liked, the teams they didn't like, but were also just very bad at their craft. Okay, I mean, and with this era of the little box, and you can say where it across the plate and all this kind of stuff, it's very easy to do a statistical evaluation and say how off are they, right? I mean, I saw a stat last season that said basically major league umps, as far as if you were looking at that box that appears on your TV when you're for the strike zone when you're watching it, the major league average was like 96%. They got it right. I mean, they're really good. Everyone they miss seems to be consequential, of course, and that's the era of we're in as well. But when you have umpires that are statistically significantly different from that league average, kick them, get them out. I mean, if they would police their own umpires to some extent and say, you got to go. You're so bad we can actually evaluate it and say, you're horrible. That's what you got to do. And I think you could get rid of the challenging balls and strikes if they knew that the truly awful ball and strike callers were just not in the game anymore. That kind of thing.
Just a couple of things about that, and then I can let you go, Flynn. I've already kept you longer than I intended to, but there's the thing that about that strike zone that you see on your television. You never see it move. The strike zone I umpired, I think, 18 years, high school and college, so it never, of course, went into the pros. But that zone should change some. The one thing that I don't like about it, though, is that you start the game by arguing balls and strikes.
Yep.
Because if that graphic that whatever television station you're watching has, and it just goes and it hits the line, it's a 50-50 pitch, you could say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he calls it a ball one time and he calls it the strike the next time. Well,
okay.
When we're going to let players tap their head and we're going to argue with the guy, I mean, you're very passively. In the Midwest, we're very familiar with passive aggressiveness. That's a passive aggressive way to say, I think you got that wrong. And that builds over time. And then we're going to be surprised when more players get thrown out, more people get. Yep. I mean, last night, Rocco Baldelli got tossed out of a game because he argued the pitch clock didn't go off or didn't run out. And, the other team said that it did. And the umpire agreed with the other team. And all of a sudden, Rocco's getting jettisoned from a game. And I'm thinking, my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are we doing? Well,
you're arguing, and I actually agree with you on that as well. What you're arguing is okay, if they're calling something consistently, the batter can adjust over time, right? I mean, so if I'm calling the outside strike, all right, and even though it says now there should be a limit to how far outside I'm allowing it to go, but if I'm calling the outside strike and it's a width of a baseball outside the strike zone, but I've called it a strike the entire game, you have 4 opportunities to adjust. And to figure out, I am calling that pitch a strike. It will be a strike the whole game. And as long as I do that, so you're we're talking about bias and consistency, which are 2 topics within statistics, right? And the bias you can correct for. If it's inconsistent, the example you gave, well, now it's inside, now it's a ball, now it's a strike. Nobody can adjust enough for inconsistency because you just don't get, especially within the context of one game. You don't get that chance.
A great project maybe for my friend David Flynn, who I know sometimes likes to do a little statistical analysis in his free time. We've discussed in the past how you're weird. We'll just leave it at that. It's always fascinating to me how we call it getaway day in baseball. So you play Monday night, you play Tuesday night, then you play Wednesday sometime middle of the day because you've got another American city you got to get to play. So those games happen in the middle of the day for travel, and sometimes there's a day off. And so, but those day games have got to be a half hour or so shorter than those other games. Well, why is that? Are they worried so much about balls and strikes anymore? Are we swinging the bat more? Are we to believe that it's the middle of the day and everybody's just happier? They got to get somewhere. It's like the rest of us when we got to get to the store, we got to get off this podcast, or we got to get. I mean, we move things along so that we can get to the next. And to me, that's really at the heart of it. You guys know what you're doing. You're professional athletes. You've done this millions of times, per se. You're making a king's ransom to play a kid's game, and really, we want to tap our head and. Now we're going to replay bang bang plays at first, and we're going to. It's just, it's really is. It's too bad at the end of the day. I get it. I understand where we are, and replays overtaken sports, and the landscape of sports has changed. JT, stop with the get off my lawn crap. I get all that, but at the end of the day, there should be some limits to this. And baseball, the great thing about baseball is in the strategy and the poetry. Somebody swings that bat, 9 people move at one time.
Absolutely.
And if you don't understand that,
like a genius, right? Fathers, mothers, parents look like geniuses when there's a squeeze play on, and they tell their kid, third base is going to run up, shortstop's going to run to third base, first base is going to run up, second base is going to run to first base. All these people are moving, and it happens, and you look like you just were a marionette. You were moving everybody like they were your puppet. You look like a genius to your kid when you explain the squeeze play defense to them. It's amazing. So absolutely right.
Yep, and then the right fielder's got to back up first base, so he's going to come here. The center fielder's going to come in to add support to second base. Left fielder's going to go, and your kid's like, holy hell! How did you know that?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's brilliant.
Well, Flynn, I want to thank you again for doing this. I appreciate you. It's been too long, my friend. I look forward to doing this more often, and we'll tackle the topics as the legislature continues to move through. They're finally to the money portion of the program. We'll let that bake in a little bit, and then you'll tell us what's good and what's bad about that and what that means to those of us that are living in this area. When you tax or tariff every third soybean, it just cannot be good for the state of North Dakota. But as you mentioned earlier, that script is still to some degree being written. So thank you, my friend. I look forward to visiting with you in the future. And make sure you have yourself a great day. All right, man?
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Thank you.